In today's episode of the Health Collective podcast, we're joined by Tracey Montgommery, a menopause strategist. A former high school chemistry teacher and horse riding instructor, she is an older single mum to her amazing daughter, who's a type 1 diabetic. And during COVID, she began her menopause journey. And although she thought at that time that she'd swerved most of the major symptoms, she soon found herself with a plethora of extremely debilitating conditions. Today, we talk about all sorts of symptoms, including lack of libido, dry vagina. We talk about lack of sleep, lethargy, lack of energy, night sweats, hot flashes, weight gain, brain fog. We talk about all the classic and slightly unclassic symptoms that we can experience, but more importantly, we talk about how we can deal with them. Various little tips and tricks and techniques to help you navigate the course of the menopause, which for a lot of people can be 10 years plus of their life. So if you're struggling with any menopausal or hormonal symptoms, then today's episode is absolutely the one for you. And if you need any support in weight loss or hormone balance or health or energy going through the menopause, then make sure you check out our unmenopause programs at our website, thehealthandfitnesscoach.com. Enjoy the episode. So, an absolutely massive welcome to Tracey for being with us today, and a huge welcome to all of you listening to today's episode of the Health Collective podcast. So, Tracey, it's lovely to see you, and thank you for taking sort of 30 odd minutes out of your day to be with us.
You're more than welcome.
So, as I mentioned in the intro, today's episode is all about that big old M, not mother, menopause, although both will apply to a lot of you. And menopause is probably something that nowadays is being talked about more and more. But up until very recently, and I would probably say the last 5 years or so, it's been a relatively, as you put it, Tracey, taboo subject. So before we get into the nitty gritty, and I like to be intimate about these things, before we talk about the menopause and the various things that go along with it, what's your experience of the menopause, and what brought you into alignment with discussing it, talking about it, and having it as a point of conversation in your life?
Yeah, well, from my point of view, I got to the stage where I was mid-50s. I'm just the other side of mid-50s now. And it was, well, actually during the pandemic. And towards the end of the pandemic, things were going a bit weird, forgetting things, like you do, bits of dropsy, that sort of thing. And I had this event, obviously over a weekend, because everything always happens over a weekend when you can't get hold of your doctor. And I had one of the most painful and heaviest periods ever, where I was literally shaking and crying. It was horrendous. So when I phoned the doctor up, it was like, yeah, I think that something's happening. Maybe we'll refer you to gynecologist to get it checked out, make sure it's nothing else, but we think it is your hormones messing around. So at the time, I was literally almost 55, just before my 55th birthday. So went to the gynecologist, female gynecologist, which I thought, this is great, this is what we want.
Yep.
I walked through the door, and the first thing she said to me was, "You're a bit old." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "You should be out the other side of this." And I was like, well, hey, looks like I am slap bang in the middle of this. And after a few discussions with her, it turns out that my symptoms were quite extreme, on the extreme end, the pain, the talking to people that I knew, and I could be having conversations with this person, and I knew that I knew this person quite well. I had this happen to me about 3 or 4 times, and they're having this conversation as if we know each other really well, and I had no clue other than I knew them. I couldn't place them. I didn't know what situation they were in. And it was like a week later, it would be like, oh, now I remember who you are. It was a bit late by then.
Yep.
So it was the fact that the gynecologist had said, oh, you're way out the other side. I'm thinking, oh, am I this freak? Am I a weirdo? Does this not happen to anybody else? But luckily, my own doctor's surgery have their own dedicated menopause nurse. talking to her, now she is younger than me, but talking to her and me saying, this is what's happened to me, she was like, no, this is the time scale of when it can start happening. It's quite a lot broader than we imagine. So we get this feeling, and we're told, like, you know, into your 40s, things are going to start happening, but not necessarily it's going to start that early. Like in my case, almost 55, and my symptoms started, and they were, for quite a long time, they were quite debilitating. And that's the other aspect, that we do recognize that these symptoms are happening, but sometimes you don't recognize how debilitating they can actually be. Because there were times where I physically couldn't function because of the symptoms being that bad. Like I say, like the pain, the if I would get like 3 come all in one, the pain, I would get the sweats, and I would get shakes, and it would be to the point where I couldn't function. So it wasn't until I went to the doctors, and I did have to go through the HRT route to settle things down, which I use in conjunction with other methods as well now. But it's always worth bearing in mind that when your symptoms are that extreme, you do need quite a large intervention to be able to function normally as a normal human being.
Absolutely. And I suppose a lot of women listening to this will relate, and a lot of women will have gone a completely different route. So, you know, menopause symptoms, I love the fact that they said you're too old, as if your body was designed with a specific tick date that said, right, now she needs to hit it. You know, so menopause symptoms can begin as early as sort of mid-30s for a lot of women. They can start as early as late as mid-50s, and they can continue for not just years, but decades. And you mentioned a few things there. So the very heavy period, or the very irregular period, is often one of the first signs. The sweats, or as some people know them as the hot flashes, the essentially the massive irregularity of temperature is another one. The brain fog, sounds like for you that was quite an extreme. And there are lots of other symptoms that we mustn't forget. So a lot of you might be experiencing things like vaginal atrophy, you know, lack of libido, and pain during sex is a huge one for women going through menopause. And it's something that we don't like to talk about. It's almost become okay to talk about getting night sweats, but not yet okay to talk about the fact that it hurts when I have sex with my partner. So there's a lot of different things that sort of happen. The weight gain for a lot of women, especially around the stomach area, can be a big factor as well. And the fatigue, the lethargy that can go along with it, as your body is fighting so many different, you know, symptoms that can come out of nowhere. So you mentioned HRT as one of the routes that you went down. And again, you know, if it works for you, I think it's do it. But we also need to understand that it doesn't work for everyone. It's not available always for everyone. And there are side effects with any sort of medication. So what are some of the other modalities that you used or tried that worked or didn't to help you with some of your symptoms during that time?
So a lot of the things that, when you look into this, are things like your diet and how you can alter your diet now. And we always talk about, as you get older, you need to be more careful about what you eat. Well, it's really prevalent as you go through the menopause journey, because we also have this misconception that, like the perimenopause, when your hormones are packing up their bags and doing one, that you get the other side of that stage and that's it. It's over and done with, but that's not necessarily so either. You're in post-menopause then, and you can still have other symptoms like your osteoporosis and the prevalence of heart conditions, those sort of things that we still need to be aware of. But to help support that, things that you eat, that you consume, can have a big impact on your overall health, and therefore obviously your health during this phase. So irritant foods should be, you try to avoid, because that's going to cause you tummy problems anyway. Things like, I know most of us can't function without our morning cup of coffee. I'm one of them. I still need my morning cup of coffee. But you have to think about how many cups you have and when you stop having your cups of coffee. And then things like when you're relaxing, when you're going to have your glass of wine, or how much of, because again, that can have issues with your hormones and with your weight as well, and how you function. So thinking about what you're consuming can have a big impact on overall health, like reducing processed foods. And I know it's easy to say, especially when we've got the cost of living as it is, a lot of the time the healthier foods cost a little bit more, but just doing little swaps like whole grains rather than the ultra processed foods can make a difference as well. Aiming more to like a Mediterranean lifestyle diet with your olive oils, and that's got quite a lot of proteins in it, like fresh fruit, fresh meats, so that you're reducing the processed foods that you eat. I know sometimes that it's a bit harder to manage to cook it all because you've got to allow time. But just little swaps like that can make a big difference to how you feel about yourself and your overall long-term health as well. So that's one of the routes that I've gone down that helps support that. So reducing the processed food, up in the more whole grain foods, the whole grain breads, the whole grain rice, even the whole grain pastas, which, like, I know some people don't like them because they don't taste quite the same, but you get used to these sort of things after a little while. Reducing your sugar content as well, because they're like empty calories, aren't they, sugars? So trying to reduce the ultra sugar foods that we often eat, like the packet of biscuits to comfort us, that once you start, you can't stop. Those sort of foods, just consciously thinking about what you're going to consume and what it is going to do to you, especially at this stage when our tummies can be quite sensitive to those sort of foods as well. And going alongside that, we have the fatigue that can set in, but making sure that we do actually move, because it can be quite easy to become even more sedentary as we get older. I know a lot of us have your jobs, maybe we are a more sedentary nation now, so it's a lot easier to, as we're doing at the moment, we're sat in front of a screen, a lot of us do it, but making sure that we do get up and we do move around, because that helps as well with your blood supply, with your circulation, keeping your bones strong, making sure those muscles are still working. So there's simple little adjustments that you can make, and they can sometimes be a little bit painful and a little bit hard to get over that threshold, but once you keep going, the benefits outweigh all of that. So they're just little adjustments that we can make as we go along. Yeah,
absolutely. And nutrition and movement are certainly the two sort of key pillars that most people will be very familiar with me talking about. And we actually just did a webinar on sort of weight gain during the menopause, and we talked about plant-based fats rather than animal-based fats. So the olive oils, the avocados, the nuts, the seeds, high protein to help with various different foods and balance. Sort of phytoestrogen type foods to really help with the estrogen hormones, and movement for sure. You know, for those that watched the webinar, you would have seen me standing because that's how I like to try and spend most of my day. So we have a lot of natural ways that we can make these changes, but most of the women listening to this are intelligent women, probably, you know, you might be in your late 30s, 40s, 50s, beyond. You don't need two women on a podcast to say, hey, stop eating so much sugar. Hey, get off the sofa and move. Hey, maybe that fifth glass of wine isn't the best idea.
because you already
So,
know.
so for those women who have heard all of this, have heard this for years, who have heard it from the doctors, who have heard it from their friends, or whoever it might be, but are sitting there going, easier said than done. How do I implement? What, especially when you are tired because you're not sleeping, because you've got sweats and you're in pain and you've got periods like you haven't had since you were 13 years old, how would you maybe suggest that they at least start? What would be a good step in the right direction when they're sort of overwhelmed by all of this stuff that they should be doing with no energy to actually, in their minds, implement? What are some good first steps?
So one of the easiest ways is to start with journal or diarising, whichever way you want to. So you're writing down what you want to do for the day. You get rid of all of what you're thinking about for the day, and then you can have checklists of what need to be done for the day. So because one of the things that can happen to us, because we get in the brain fog and we're getting overwhelmed and we can have all the anxiety coming in, is that our routines and our needs to get a bit lost, and then we have even more anxiety coming in, we get even more overwhelmed. So if we can, I mean, we always used to, back in the day, we always used to have our written diaries, our written journals. We used to write down, especially when we were teenagers. I'm sure that most of us as teenagers had our diary and we wrote down what we did for the day. If we start doing that sort of thing, so you've got in your journal, within your journal, the appointments that you need, the shopping, the week, when to do it, so that all of that's out of your head before your day starts. And then you can monitor then how you're feeling. If you've had a bad night's sleep, if you've had to change because you've had hot flashes or night sweats, you can start monitoring, and then you don't have to keep thinking about it. It's there on paper, and you can just reflect on it, and you can monitor what's happening to you. So you can see the changes that are happening. You can see if these patterns are getting heavier, worse, if you need to talk to somebody, if you need to look for support elsewhere, or conversely, if things are getting a little bit easier because you've put them on paper, out of the way, so you've got less to carry around with you for the day. So I found that's helped quite a lot of women that I've spoken to, is to get the little things out of the way. So like, if we've still got people to pick up or people to take to places, it's not you're thinking about, got to remember it all day, it's in your diary. And I know we use diaries on our phones and that sort of thing, but writing them down, how you're feeling, on top of the fact that, oh look, I've got to go to the shops at 10 o'clock, or I've got to take mum to the doctor's for 12. That if they are there already, and then you're like, well, I really didn't sleep very well last night because of, and you've written all of that down, it's all out of the way. You can always look back and reflect on it at a later date. And I think that helps an awful lot, because it's out of your head, it's on a bit of paper, and you haven't got to be carrying it around with you then.
Absolutely. Journaling it down, diarising, time blocking, whatever it works for you, to make sure that you're not carrying the whole weight of the world, in your mind, because that's where it can become very challenging and swirling, especially as you sort of alluded to. You use the phrase take mum to the doctor, and most of the women that we're speaking to right now are in that sort of stuck in the middle stage, the glue that holds the Oreo together. You've probably got teenage kids that need Ubering around at every, hour of the day and night for some of you. And then probably also elderly parents who need Ubering around to various different appointments and checkups. So there are a lot of things that we've talked about that do happen in the menopause, but there are also probably a lot of misconceptions about the menopause, a lot of myths. And you alluded to one earlier, which was the time span. Menopause doesn't wait until you're 40, hit, and then finish as soon as you hit the big 50. It could, be a 30-year range almost that menopause can sort of cover. So what are some of the other myths or misconceptions that you've come across in your learning about this particular area?
There's like I said, my age being, that's a big one. The fact then that once you're on this perimenopause, with all the hormones doing the flux and causing the hassles, that's going to be over in a short period of time. And like you just said, it can take years. I mean, we're coming up to 4 years now of mine still getting symptoms, even though I've got HRT. They still are symptoms still there. So this the hormonal change can last multitude of years, not just a little short period of time. And then there's once you're through it, I don't know what we're getting through, that we're not going to have any of these symptoms, because you can still get the night sweats, you can still get the disturbed sleeps on until we're not here anymore. So that's another big misconception, is that once you've gone through the perimenopause, that's it, over and done with. I'm out the other side, I've got my badge, and that's it. But in reality, because those hormones are no longer there, you still need to be considering what you're doing to yourself, what you're consuming, because like I mentioned earlier, there's the osteoporosis, because you haven't got the estrogens in there supporting your bone structure. You haven't got your muscle retention is not there so much. So there's still that side of your musculoskeletal system needs looking after, as well as the brain support as well. So it's not I've got out the other side, here's my badge, I'm going to carry on. It's I still need to think about that these symptoms, that the menopause is still affecting me. It's just that we don't recognize that. We are quite like, it's a short period of time, it's over and done with, it's out the way. But it's not. Once we hit the menopause, we've got that for the rest of our duration. So we still need to consider what we're doing to ourselves and how we're doing it.
Absolutely. I mean, once you sort of go through the menopause of any stage or description, your body is fundamentally changed. It is no longer what it used to be, and that's fine. For those listening going, oh my goodness, this hasn't hit me yet, this sounds horrendous, there are challenges, but equally, as long as we accept that the body has changed and we work with that change rather than against it, then we can do amazing things with our body still, regardless of age or what's happened. So a word that you've used a lot today, and also a lot of people will use when it comes to menopause, is hormones. And this word is bandied about, but maybe isn't understood particularly well, because I think most people aren't aware that hormones control pretty much everything in our system, whether we're hungry, whether we're sleepy, whether we feel energized or fatigued, our sex drive, our hair growth, everything is pretty much run by our endocrine system and the hormones involved. So when you talk about hormones in relation to menopause, which hormones are you talking about, and what are the changes that women would expect to see in those hormones?
Yes, so the main hormones, they're the same female hormones that we've had since we were teenagers. So you're mainly talking about your estrogens, your progesterone, and they are the ones that cause our menstrual cycle. They're the ones that look after our uterus when we're having go through pregnancy. They're the ones that help us to influence how we feel as well, because a lot of which is something that we don't often recognize that hormones are associated with, is that the female hormones are there to nurture as well, because basically that's what we're here for, is to help produce more of us and nurture that little person until they can go off and look after themselves. So the fact that they are declining as well can have effects on our usefulness. So the hormones, as they decline, mainly progesterone and estrogen, when we're talking about your libido, that's actually testosterone. And we associate testosterone with males, but actually we as females still have testosterone. And testosterone is there, like I say, for libido, but it's also sort of like that when we have adrenaline surges, testosterone levels can become raised as well, which is why sometimes the mood swings can be quite quick depending on those sort of levels. So the combination of these hormones is they're in flux all the time because we have our cycles, and our brain gets used to our cycles, and it gets used to these hormones being delivered to us, and it's telling the body how to behave and what it should do at certain times of the month and under certain circumstances. So if we do become pregnant, it tells us, our brain, to do different things. And then our brain gets confused because those hormone levels start to decline.
Yeah.
And decline in one hormone can affect a decline in another hormone, but it can also increase others. So decreases in like our estrogens and progesterones can lead to increases in cortisol, which can then increase our anxiety and our stress levels. So when one hormone's decreasing, others can increase, and it's trying to keep all of them, especially at this time, under control so that things don't get too out of control.
Absolutely. And, you know, a lot of people will be familiar with estrogen and what happens with estrogen. But as you rightly say, testosterone, the androgens, the male hormones, are hormones that are really, really key players in female health. We need both in our life, you know, as in everything, balance is key. But often, you know, at this time of life as well, we are innately more stressed anyway. You know, cortisol is probably higher because we're working full time, kids, household, you know, life changes happen, like marriages break up, we change careers, all sorts of things that when you're 18, you know, what's the worst that happens? Your high school boyfriend goes off to
Yeah.
university or something. So the stress levels do play a massive impact. And I'm glad you sort of brought that up. So in terms of really helping women to understand where they're at in this stage, because we've talked about menopause, but there could be women sitting at home going, well, am I in it? I don't know. Has it started? Am I in perimenopause? What's happening with my body? Yes, I keep forgetting things, but that's happened my whole life. Is that is
Yeah.
that to do with menopause, you know? So how what are some of the first steps that women could take to discover if they are in any stage of menopause, or what are some of the key aspects that they should look out for to be aware of if their body is starting to change in that direction?
So there's a couple of things there that can, so when we talked about the journaling, you can start to write down things that are a bit off, things that are changing, things that you're noticing a bit more. And then when you do your journal reflection, you can look and see if there are patterns bringing up as well. But there are certain symptoms that you can look. I mean, you can get symptom checkers. I've got my own symptom checker, but you've got symptom checkers that can go from the main 5 or 6 to up to 40 different symptoms that we don't often associate with the menopause as well, that are things, I mean, things like, you know, itchy eyes, that sort of thing. Who would have thought that that could be one? So, and you put those down to something else rather than it being menopausal. So noticing things that change and noticing if they're coming along with something else as well. So if you're getting, like I just said, the itchy eyes, and you're getting like the sweats as well, and maybe your periods are starting to get a little bit out of sync, maybe those sort of things, noticing the patterns is key to noticing if you're starting the menopause, and then monitor how severe they actually are. Because like I said, mine got extreme before I thought, yeah, maybe it is. So I wouldn't like anyone to get quite as extreme as mine. So maybe I should have been making more note beforehand.
So I completely agree with that. And I think there's an awful lot of symptoms which we don't associate with menopause. Another key that I would say, you know, as we come to the end of the episode is don't just let doctors put it down to the menopause either. You know, a lot of women will sort of talk about symptoms and say, oh, it's, you know, I see it a lot in my line of work, you know, especially with weight loss in menopause, where it's, oh, well, apparently I have X because I'm overweight. Or, well, this is just because I happen to be going through the menopause. And you know your body, I think, is probably the message both of us would give. And if you feel something isn't right, push. Don't just let someone kind of brush it under the carpet, because that's what happens. That's not okay. So some really, really good tips there, some really good advice and help that you've offered. So thank you so much for sort of talking about it today. And as a last nugget, I suppose, to wrap up on, because we always like to leave people with a bit of a takeaway. If you were to leave the women listening with one thought, one view, one change in idea, what is it that you would like to leave the listeners with today?
Yeah, don't feel isolated. You're not the only one that's ever going to go through this, and you're not the freak in the corner that's got these symptoms. There's 51% of us on the planet. So at some point, somebody's going to have had those symptoms that you've got. So yeah, don't go through it alone is what my biggest recommendation is.
So find community, find support, talk about it, these kind of things.
Yes.
Do you find that, I mean, for yourself specifically, did you find that your own emotional and mental health was quite affected by the symptoms?
Definitely. And the fact that we'd just gone through the pandemic, so we were isolated anyway. And it wasn't until I'd actually been to the gynecologist and started mentioning it to my group of girlfriends, and they were like, oh, well, yeah, we've, and and it was like, it wasn't until we actually started discussing it that we became, I mean, now we are quite open about what we talk about between each other, and we've got this little checklist that we've all had because we're over a certain age type of thing, and it's like, yeah, I've had that one, and we've got our silly little names that I better not mention on here for each one. So yeah, talking about it helps so much because you're not alone. So it is, and it is easy for us, especially as women, we take everything. We are, it's me, I can deal, I can cope, I've got this. And sometimes we do need another shoulder to put a little bit of support onto. So yeah, don't go through it alone is my big tip.
Absolutely. I love that. If you are feeling down or low or isolated, seek support. You won't be judged. And, if someone isn't giving you that support in a particular role, whether it's at work, because I think a lot of people still struggle. We get maternity leave, right? You've had a baby, that's okay, go and have some time off. But you can't remember anything, you're bleeding excessively, you're in pain, you can't sleep. No, just carry on as normal, chin up.
Yeah.
So I think even in the workplace, find people that can support you through that. So brilliant takeaway, brilliant nugget to leave it on. And as ever, if people want to get in touch with Tracey, all of her details will be in the podcast episode. So please look out for all of those links and ask away, ask questions. She's an open book. I'm more than happy to help. So it just leaves me to say a massive thank you. Thank you to everyone for listening to today's episode. I hope it's been informative. And thank you so much, Tracey, for taking up your time to be with us today.
Thank you for the invite. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Been wonderful. Well, everyone, hope you've learned something. Reach out if you need support. And in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your fabulous day. And I'll see you on the next episode. All right. Bye.